Welcome to Spirit Outspoken, the podcast for Christians who are ready to explore the deeper side of faith.
We believe God's truth is bigger than what we've been taught, and that real spirituality isn't something to fear, it's something to discover.
Each week, we open the space to explore miracles, energy, healing, consciousness, and divine science, all through the lens of a God who loves us and a faith that's still unfolding.
Whether you're deconstructing, rebuilding, or just feeling spiritually stuck, this is your place to reconnect with wonder, deepen your walk, and let the Spirit speak. Welcome back to part 2 of our conversation with Brian Recker, a former evangelical pastor who's become a bold, refreshing spiritual voice for a new generation of Jesus followers. In part 1, we explored his journey out of traditional ministry and into the deep questions the church often avoids. Today, we're continuing that conversation, diving even further into those hard topics: hell, exclusion, power, and the true message of Jesus. Brian's upcoming book, Hellbent, takes an unflinching look at the doctrines that have shaped modern Christianity. In this episode, Brian challenges us to move beyond fear-based belief systems and imagine a faith that is honest, inclusive, and grounded in love. His mission is clear: to help untangle harmful theology, rediscover the heart of Jesus, and walk in a faith that brings freedom instead of fear.
Now, the intuition thing is interesting. It took me a long time to get to the point where I can trust it. And, I think that that's a really interesting conversation, because I think it's possible to have really twisted thoughts and ideas. It was like Hitler following his intuition when he made the decision that he made. Like, that's what you'll sometimes get. Like, if you're like arguing about this with somebody, they'll say, "Oh, follow your heart." Like, I bet Hitler was following his heart. Look where it got him, or something like that. And I do think, but that's what the purpose of spirituality is, I think, right? To actually to grow in love, to cultivate those characteristics within yourself so that you can more deeply trust your heart. I do think that all of us have at the center, if you're made in the image of God, I think part of what that means is that you have God in you, and you are at your very core unshakably good and deeply loved. Does that mean that I should trust every impulse that rises up in me? Not necessarily, but I think that's the spiritual work, is to getting at that love that is there and learning how to listen to that voice, which is the true self. I believe that each of us, everybody, even the most broken person, they have layers and layers of ego and lies and illusion. Then maybe it's like they're not hearing that at all, but I have to believe that there is love in there, and there is a true self that I ultimately believe, as a universalist, I believe that God will reconcile that true self to God's love, and that everybody, that nobody's irredeemable. But that's a faith belief that I still hold on to. That seems to be helping me. But yeah, so for me, part of my spiritual journey is learning to trust myself, learning to look for that love, learning how to listen to that voice of love, and discern, is this leading me into connection or disconnection? And the irony is that the systems that we were raised in actually made it harder to listen to that, because, for instance, I was told God is love. God's also going to punish you and send people to hell for being wrong. That meant that if God was love and God was a punisher, that means that love could look like punishment sometimes, which meant that sometimes, yes, like, am I listening to love, or am I just listening to revenge that's in me? And it's like, oh, I wasn't actually taught even to discern those things, because I was told that love could look like punishment. And so I think having a more pure idea of even what love is really important.
Oh my gosh, what you just said is so important, having a spirit of discernment, right? And it's not necessarily needing to know what's right and wrong. I think that's where people really get tripped up, right? Because they're so scared. They've been absolutely raised with every cell of their being to be like, there's a right way and a wrong way. And the wrong way, I heard somebody say once, the pathway to hell is paved with good intentions. And I was like, oh my God, I have many good intentions. I don't know what to do with that. And I just remember that shook me, because I was like, man, even having a good heart and good intent could put me in hell, right? But I think what you're saying is so important about really doing the work, right? getting to a place of working through your own egos, working through your own masks, challenging your belief systems that perhaps you've held on to for so long because you were told them, not necessarily because you believe them in your heart of hearts or in your soul. So like doing that work, I think then makes the barometer a little bit easier for us. Like your spirit is coming from a place of love. It's really challenging to say like, okay, well, I'm going to discriminate between, gay people because they want to get married and they want to have a loving relationship. To me, I'm just like, what is wrong with us? Like we are so focused on stripping away their rights, so focused on saying, you're wrong, you're wrong, you're wrong, instead of being like, what is the most loving, compassionate thing that we can do? And I think we've gotten so far away. I'll tell you when I realized we got really far away. I I was scrolling on Instagram back the second time that Trump was elected, and there was like a water painting called Rachel, and I think I was hysterical, not crying. I just was like, I've literally seen it all. Where Jesus was washing Trump's feet. And I just was like, we've really gotten far away. We've gotten really far away. But what's really cool is that it also feels like we're at this precipice of dismantling. It feels like we're coming up to a head. It feels like that. And I do feel like people want to say like, it's enough. Like we want to take Christianity back. We want to take who the real Christ is back. We no longer want him to be your political mascot. I don't know.
I hope you're right. I don't know. I love your optimism. I am sometimes very. I just know that these institutions have no desire to change. Because what they're doing is working. I mean, churches overall. Actually, I think it stopped shrinking. I think actually people have stopped. I want to say it's leveled off. There was a great sort of migration. I don't know. I might kick
Mass
back up.
exodus.
Yeah, there was. But I think the latest data I saw. The data always lags just a little bit, so it's hard to say exactly what's happening right now. But it seemed like the exodus kind of leveled off, and it might be counterbalanced by the fact that some men are going back to church looking for help in navigating. They're feeling agency taken away from them. They're interpreting their loss of cultural dominance as being discriminated against or like prejudice or being, they're suffering in some way. And I think they're looking to regain that within church. So men are going, women are leaving. It might be leveling off a little bit, but overall, I don't have much optimism for the institution of evangelicalism really changing. It might eventually dwindle, but I am excited about what's happening outside of those institutions and the conversations that are happening. I do know that it was Trump's first presidency ultimately that sent me on my deconstruction journey. And I have to think that how crazy is it that 10 years later, we're still talking about this guy and he's still like, what the fuck? That like 10 years, like literally like 2015 was when he became the front runner. And that was a wake up call for me. For me, the big aha moment was the people who shaped my moral discernment and what was right, what was wrong, what was good, what was bad. Those people couldn't see through Donald Trump. They saw that and they thought, that's good. I like it. I want him in charge. And I realized at that point, it's like, oh my God, I let them tell me what was right or wrong about everything. And if they couldn't see through this is one of the most, like, I don't know everything. I'm not the smartest guy. One thing I know, I'm pretty sure about one goddamn thing. And it's that dude is bad news. If you can't see that, I'm not sure I trust you about anything. And that was what I felt in my bones 10 years ago.
That's valid.
And here we are 10 years later. And it's like, he's still the guy and he's got more fans than ever. And so that can be very disheartening. So that's where my lack of like, I don't know, man, I'm not sure if I have your enthusiasm because like, wouldn't we have figured it out by now? That being said, even right now you have MAGA is up in arms because of the Epstein files. And so he's getting the pushback from his base right now. I don't know where that's going to end up. People like Joe Rogan are like, that's not what I voted for. And I'm really confused. I just don't understand. I'm like, what do you mean you don't understand? He told us who he was 10 years ago. Like, it'd be one thing if he's just on the scene. The guy has been doing the same shit for 10 years. Like, you're just clued into it.
I know. Imagine how bad it's got to get to lose Joe Rogan. I mean, I was like...
I even had a tweet where I said something to that effect, like, oh, you're surprised? He's only been telling us who he is for 10 years now, Joe. But, some people commented on that and were like, hey, this doesn't sound like you because normally you're very open to people changing their minds and stuff. And that reminded me like, yes, I am. Okay, that's true. I believe that. I'm allowed to be frustrated, obviously, at like, yeah, you should have known better. I actually just saw a really encouraging poll today that a recent poll of Americans on immigration, favorability of just the idea of immigration. Is immigration good or bad? Are immigrants good or bad? And it's like 70% of Americans say immigration is good, which surprised me. And that's actually higher than normal. That's gone up. And so it's normally hovers around 58, 59% is kind of the normal read for that. And so what Trump is doing, in other words, is not working in terms of it's not capturing. People aren't like, yeah, like some people are. They're loud and they're obnoxious and they're in your comment section. So you think that they're everybody, but it's probably like 20% of people who are like, hell yeah, get them. And, they're celebrating alligator Alcatraz. But the louder they tell on themselves with that stuff, I do think a lot of people are able to see that for what it is. And it does cause them to say, hey, maybe they're off about some other stuff too, which can hopefully cause people to dig a little deeper. But I just don't know, because I thought that was going to happen a while ago, and things seem to be getting worse in some ways. So
I know. Listen, it's gotta get real bad before it gets better. Okay, so like I'll hold on to the positivity, but I don't disagree. Like I think the people that are really dug in and that are doubling down, they will continue to do that. I just think like the people that were surprised, I'll be generous, surprised by Trump's recent presidency, I think that there's going to be more of that, and people are going to distance themselves more and more. I mean, at least I hope, right? Because we're obviously seeing a whole nother layer of
do you think it's
confusion.
good for the terms to be clear? One thing I appreciate about Trump is that he does make it very clear, like what the sides are, and I think. For a long time, it was like compassionate conservatism. And, with the Romney and George W. Bush, that was when I was younger, but still evangelical or even fundamentalist. And it was like I was raised as a conservative Christian, and emphasis on the conservative. Like we listened to Rush Limbaugh every day for social studies when I was homeschooled. That was just beamed into my skull. And that Democrats, like if you're a Democrat, you're evil, and liberal is evil, conservative is good. And I think for a lot of people who are indoctrinated in that way, I think Trump really does make it hard to, hold on. The fact that you're the party of morality, I don't know. Like I appreciate how stark it is. And so it is, I think, at least for me, when I'm, we can clearly call people like, this doesn't look like Jesus. And so that's kind of what I do again and again on my platform, just because it is the very low hanging fruit. I think most people can see okay, you have a point there. It doesn't really look like Jesus.
It's going to be more and more difficult, I think, for people to deny that. I think because, again, like if God really lives within all of us, that voice will start to speak up. It may not happen overnight, but I think as time goes on, and if we keep illuminating the fact, is this Christ, or no, right? I think people will really have a hard time being like, yes, that looks exactly like Christ, shoving humans in cages and separating families. Hell no. But I want to talk about your book. Okay, so it's out September 30th. So you can pre-order it now. And the title is, and I'm obsessed with the title, Hell Bent: How the Fear of Hell Holds Christians Back from a Spirituality of Love. So will you tell us about what we can expect in this book, what brought you to write it? Just tell us everything.
My original subtitle was How Hell Fucks Up Christian Spirituality and How to Fix It. The publisher helped me with that. So yeah, hell was always really problematic for me. Like I said, I was raised in fundamentalism, and I had that fear, and that's how I came to relationship with God. The same as honestly very many of us, I got saved when I was told what would happen if I didn't get saved. And so I was given the good news that I deserved to die and burn in hell forever, but that Jesus died in my place and took my punishment because I deserved to be punished, but Jesus was punished for me. And that only counts, though, if you believe in it in a particular way, and then God won't punish you. The punishment goes on Jesus. You get to go to heaven. Jesus suffered hell in your place. That was the story. That was the gospel story. I don't know. Is that familiar to y'all? You know that one?
Oh.
You've heard that story before?
I've heard it from other people. I wasn't raised in that church, but I've heard it through friends and other.
It's a story about punishment. It's the spirituality of punishment. And what I began to realize in my deconstruction, especially as I began to take apart hell, and really in my studying as well, recognize that the Bible is not as clear about hell as I was made to believe, that all the preachers who say Jesus talks about hell more than anybody, you got to believe in hell. Jesus from my reckoning, doesn't talk about hell at all. He talks about Gehenna. And if you don't think Gehenna is hell, then Jesus didn't talk about hell. I think that we really missed the message of Jesus on hell, which I get into in the book. But more than just, as I began to realize, that hell is not as clear in the Bible as I thought, I realized pulling it out of my spirituality was going to be really difficult, because the whole Christian story that I had learned was one that had punishment and avoiding hell at the very center of what it meant to be saved, what it meant to be a Christian, what it meant to be saved, what salvation meant was to be the kind of person who wasn't going to hell. And so if there was no hell, what that brings up is all kinds of questions. Well, why did Jesus come? Why did Jesus die? What's the point of any of it? Why become a Christian if there's no hell? Because what does it mean to be born again or to be saved if there's no hell? And so as I was wrestling with those personally in my deconstruction, and really discovering a lot of beautiful theologies that had nothing to do with hell. I mean, liberation theology is a whole Christian tradition that really sees salvation in terms of liberation for the oppressed. And it's not about a punitive afterlife focused thing. Or the more mystical traditions that see salvation as really getting in touch with the true self and shedding the layers of false self. And it's seeing being born again, these things as spiritual metaphors for a life of growing in love and transformation, as opposed to, being punished in the afterlife. And so, when I would talk about hell, I got those questions from people, and I realized there were books about hey, maybe hell isn't a thing. Let's question hell. But I didn't really see a book that went that one level deeper to really try to rescue the whole story and spirituality, and realize actually what many of us received was so twisted up by hell that when you take hell out, it's like pulling a thread in the sweater and it unravels the whole sweater. And it's well, I guess I'm not a Christian anymore. And so for a lot of people, it's if I don't believe in hell, I can't be a Christian. And it's why would those two things, for a lot of people, that makes logical sense. I literally, here's when I knew I was going to write this book. I invited somebody to church who was also deconstructing. And after church, I was what'd you think? And they were yeah, it was good. But so you don't believe in hell, right? And I'm right. It's so why do you even go to church? And in that moment, I was oh my gosh. Because on the surface, what does believing in hell have to do with going to church?
That's so sad. It's so sad.
You wouldn't say to somebody oh, you go to yoga, but you don't even believe in hell. Why do you practice mindfulness if you don't believe in hell? The reason we don't ask that is because we see the positive spiritual benefits of mindfulness, of yoga. It's oh, you're doing that to cultivate something of connection and spiritual wholeness. But with Christianity, for a lot of people, it was punishment avoidance. And so if you take that part out of it, it's I was just doing this because I didn't want to go to hell. What's the point of this? And so trying to help people recapture that if they want to, because I think for a lot of people, there is a sadness about losing spiritual connection, losing Jesus. And I think you can deconstruct punishment without losing spirituality. So yeah, I think I realized I was bent by hell, and I knew a lot of other people were. And so that's why I wrote that book.
I'm so excited, but it's really funny what you're talking about, that analogy, or that revelation of, oh, well, why do you go to church if you don't believe in hell? It's such a good point, right? Why are we doing this? Why are we doing this?
I think it just speaks so much to the authentic relationship that I believe Jesus wants to have with us. And so many people are missing the mark. Because like you said, they're so focused on this punishment and fear, and they're missing the whole point, sadly. Yeah, I love it. I can't wait to read it.
And not only do I feel you're missing the point, but it gives you, it disorders your spirituality. The first part of the book, I talk about how it's not just oh, you don't have to believe in hell. I think when you believe in hell, your relationship with God, even if you think it's not. And this is what I realized when I entered evangelicalism. At first, it was so refreshing because they're not talking about hell all the time. I mean, most evangelical churches, especially mega churches, they're somewhat seeker sensitive. They're not preaching fire and brimstone sermons. But you know where you're going to see hell? In their statement of faith on the website. And you'll hear about it when there's some sort of moment of conversion, where maybe at camp, kids are going to hear about it when they go to Christian camp. They're going to be told about hell in order to get them to go to an altar call. You're making a face. Was that you? Did you have that experience?
Well, so this is going to be very confusing for you, but our kids go to Catholic church.
That's not confusing.
Okay.
I mean,
well, I mean, people do kind of scratch their heads, right? Because, but
you go with them, or just your kids go?
Our kids go to Catholic school, but my perspective is, and I believe Rachel's is also, is listen, they're not going to get it all right. They are going to be raised with Christian principles of kindness, compassion, and the school itself is great, but Mass itself, I feel I'm very clear with my child that like I don't put my belief system on them, but I ask them questions to critically think for themselves. And it's really interesting because like I'll be like, what do they talk about at mass today? And they'll bring up topics of
Oh,
hell. And I'm like,
interesting.
what do you think about hell? You know, and it's really interesting to see the response because kids have a pretty strong barometer for bullshit. And, you know, like without even really realizing it. And my oldest is a total rule follower. If somebody of authority or a teacher tells him something, and I'll just ask him questions like, well, what do you think about hell? And like, would you think, you know, like just kind of just bringing him on his own path. And he usually gets to a place that I feel like is pretty balanced. Like there's some thought versus him being like, oh, yeah, okay, right or wrong, this or that. So we're trying to navigate that for sure.
Well, I think fostering that curiosity is exactly right. And what was not given to me and what is not given to most people in that paradigm where hell is a part of the story. Because again, if anything as frightening, as horrifying, as forever, as punishing as that is in your future as a potential outcome, you don't really have the luxury of cultivating curiosity and explore different things. Like what feels right? No, like you need to get this shit right or you're fucked. And so I think that for me, one of the best parts about deconstructing that was recognizing that I could be curious. I could ask questions. I don't have to land anywhere. I don't have to have it all figured out because the point isn't being right. It's growing in love. So I don't even ask, like, is this the right thing to believe as much as is this the
Mm-hmm.
loving thing to believe? And like, I couldn't do that before. And so I think that's great. And I think in general, Catholics do tend to be less dogmatic about hell. They leave a little bit more room for mystery. They have things like purgatory
Yes.
that soften
Yeah.
the blow. The Pope recently said he hopes hell is empty. They leave some ambiguity. And, you know, different Christian traditions do speak about it differently. In evangelicalism, though, it tends to be they pull it out as necessary. It's usually behind the curtain in most evangelical churches, but it's like humming in the background where, but you've got to believe in Jesus. You've got to be saved. You've got to be a Christian because obviously non-Christians go to hell. That is like, it's almost assumed. They don't have to tell you over and over again. Once they've told you once, you're going to remember.
You know, like what I struggle with too is I thought about this the other day. I was having a conversation with somebody that's like takes the Bible very literally, definitely evangelistic Christian. And I was like, this is what I struggle with, right? So if we're all children of God, and that's like, you know, a baseline understanding that most people, evangelistic Christians or any Christian will have some kind of connection to that statement. If we're all children of God, and one child of God is born and raised in Tibet, and they are a Buddhist monk, and they spend their times meditating and quite literally won't hurt a fly. And they live their life, you know, trying to reach just compassion and enlightenment. And that's how they spend their days. And then there is a very vocal, public Christian evangelist that cheats on his wife, has a history of abuse in the church. Like, you're telling me like the one in Tibet is going to go to hell? Like, I just am like, what are you talking about? And like, I'm also thinking about like, if God is all of like, if we are all children of God, why would God put Jasa in white Christian America with basically a fast pass to heaven versus somebody that's born, you know, Jewish in another country that doesn't believe that Christ is the savior, and they have to abandon their family, their cultural upbringing, their religion, everything that they have been taught to believe is true in order to find the path to heaven. To me, I'm like, that's almost having two children and one has a broken leg and the other one's perfectly healthy, and you're expecting them both to cross the finish line at the exact same time. It makes no sense to me. It's not logical. And what I really struggle with is like when I have these types of logic-based conversations with evangelistic Christians, it's like, well, they've got this playbook of things like, well, you know, at one point that boy born in Tibet would have been exposed to Jesus, and it would have been up to him to say that he doesn't believe in Jesus. And I was like, and yet again, like to abandon everything he's ever known to be true, his culture, his upbringing, his traditions. Right. Like I just struggle with that.
That whole spiel, it's funny. I think when evangelicals are confronted with that, you're right. They have these cop out answers. They'll say stuff like, well, first of all, like, we're not God. I'm not God. They'll appeal to mystery in that moment. They'll say, well, God can send a vision. God can do whatever God wants. Like, God could send that boy a vision, a dream, can, put one person in his path. But it gets very goofy because you're not talking about this one individual kid. You're really talking about an entire culture that you're saying is damned because they don't have this right answer that you have. And that doesn't even, like you said, have anything to do with the kind of person you're becoming necessarily. It has more to do with assenting to particular dogmas. And they can say that it's not just about believing dogmas, it's about having a relationship with God. But like, I don't know. I think the proof is in the pudding. And if you look at you're telling me if you look at the average American and you're going to say like that we're more spiritual in Christian America than in some of these other countries, like a majority Buddhist country, like that we've got the corner on spirituality and love. Like it's just, I'm not seeing it. The math isn't mathing. And I think for a lot of people, there's a discontent with accepting those answers. And they have apologetic moves that they can make to try to say like, here, this makes logical sense still, but it's not emotionally satisfying. Like, even if you can make it all fit together in your system.
So true. Yeah. How do you explain this to your kids? Like, how do you explain hell to them?
I mean, they thankfully, we left when they were pretty young. So that Judah was just getting to the age where I was starting to feel guilty that I hadn't, because I was a pastor, right? And I remember I got saved when I was like 5 or 6 years old. And other 5 or 6-year-old kids of the other pastors on my sort of team were kind of getting saved or having conversion experiences because the parents were having these conversations about, being in a relationship with God, accepting Jesus into your heart, going to heaven when you die, all that stuff. And I was starting to get to that. Judah was, let's see, he would have been 5 in 2020. And so he was kind of at the age where it's like, am I supposed to like start pushing this shit on him? And it never felt right. I was never an evangelist in the sense that I was never pushy and trying to like win people to the Lord. I tried to preach what felt like actual good news, which, even when I was a pastor, but I always felt guilty about that. I thought that was a deficiency in me. Like I wasn't a good evangelist because I should have been like getting more conversions, because obviously if hell is real, conversions are really important. Like coercion is even important. You could even say that coercing people into becoming Christians is a loving thing to do if you're trying to save them from hell, because like what's more unloving than letting somebody go into an eternal fate like that, right? So I was feeling like, oh man, I'm not, am I supposed to? But I was also deconstructing that at the same time. And I think that played into it too. I definitely my parenting impacted my deconstruction, no doubt. Even in regards to, changing my mind about LGBTQ issues. Like when my first son was born, I remember thinking, I was a pastor, and the belief of our church is homosexuality is a sin. And in my heart, I wasn't homophobic. I didn't have bad feelings about it. I wasn't grossed out by it. I wasn't like angry at gay people, but I was in that world to where I felt like that was what I was supposed to believe. And so I remember when my son was born, I felt like, man, I hope my son's not gay. Not because I would love him less, not because I would feel differently about him, but because like, well, that is going to be like a whole thing that we're going to have to go through. He's going to have to go through it. He's going to be told this is a sin. He's going to hate himself and experience shame. I'm going to feel like I'm supposed to hold that line to honor God. Like it's going to be a choice between honoring God or like loving my son. I didn't want anything to do with that whole thing. So I just had to like push it down and say, I hope that doesn't fucking happen. And I remember when I left the church, and within that year, I was like, well, I'm definitely changing my mind about that. I'm going to affirm queer people. In 2021, I like began to make gay friends and was able to like, celebrate them. And it was so different. It was night and day. And one of the best things that happened, I have some very close friends who are gay dads, married guys. And we were hanging out with them maybe a year or two after we left the church. So my son is maybe like 6 or 7 years old. I hadn't really had many conversations. It was the first conversation that we really had about like what it meant to be gay. He was asking me about it because he was talking about crushes, and he was like confused if maybe he had a crush on a boy, maybe he had a crush on a girl. He didn't even really know what it meant. But I was able to just say, hey, listen, like whoever you love is going to be beautiful. Like if you love a boy, that's beautiful. If you love a girl, that's beautiful. You can love anybody. Just like Dustin and Burton are good buddies. They love each other and their love is beautiful. And whoever you love, I'm going to celebrate that. And like, I I was like telling him this and I was just like making myself cry. And I was just so thankful. I was so thankful that I wasn't still in that world where if he asked me that question a couple years before that, I would have had fear injected into my body. I would have been like, oh my God, I hope he's not gay. I hope he doesn't go down that path because what if, and instead I was able to just simply celebrate him. I really feel like we've normalized it so much and talked about it so much. And we have so many queer friends that I don't even think at this point, he wouldn't even have to come out. Honestly, he would just be like, I'm dating this person now, you know?
Yeah.
Which is so wonderful. When you were talking about your kids, I think they get it. I mean, I remember walking through some store during Pride Month, right? And all the rainbows were there. And my daughter was like, well, what's that about? So I was kind of explaining what it's about. And she goes, well, why would anyone care who someone loves? And I said, exactly, sweetie. I don't know. Like, they just get it. They don't have all those layers of confusion and shame and distortion that the rest of us have. I don't know. They're just so pure. I just love it.
Yeah, we can see how much of it was socialized.
Kids know way more than we do. That's for damn sure. I mean, like, they can just call BS where they're like, well, that doesn't make any sense. You know, I don't know. What would you leave us with? Like, if there's like one thing that you're excited about or one thing that, you know, you want to challenge people to think differently about, like what would that be?
And I feel like I've said so many things already. I'll just revisit something I already said that has been a helpful thing for me. And maybe this is just a helpful tool or just like a liberating idea. Just that idea that like, you don't need to be right. And I ask myself not like, is this the right answer? Is this the correct thing as much as is this the loving thing? And that's been just a simple change to get away from what am I supposed to believe? You know, is this okay to believe? This isn't about getting the right answers on the belief test so you can avoid being punished by God. What is causing you to grow in love and to judge the fruits of those beliefs in your life? When there's something where you're like, oh, but is this true? Am I wrong? To ask, well, what does that do to my life and in my body when I believe that? Is it helping me at all? Is it helping me become a more loving person? Or is it actually making me more judgmental and fearful? And if so, like, that's probably not the truth. It's not God's truth because God is love.
We're so glad you joined us for part 2 of our conversation with Brian Recker. If his words resonated with you, you're going to love his upcoming book, Hellbent: How the Fear of Hell Holds Christians Back from a Spirituality of Love. It's a powerful, freeing read that I think so many of us need right now. You can pre-order it on Amazon, and it officially comes out September 30th. Visit brianrecker.com to find links to all of his socials, courses, and more about his work.
Thanks for joining us for today's episode. If you're ready to take your spirituality to the next level, be sure to check out our website, spiritoutspoken.com. There you can download free educational resources, read our latest blog posts, and join the Spirit Outspoken community.
And don't forget to follow us on Instagram and TikTok at Spirit Outspoken to stay up to date on news, happenings, shenanigans, and all things Spirit Outspoken.